The speeding ticket that saved my life. I need to tell you something before this story starts. By the time it's over, you're going to hear about a basement, a man who shouldn't have been standing where he was standing, and a police officer who showed up at exactly the right door, at exactly the right second. But none of that is the part that haunts me most. The part that haunts me most is the moment I chose to walk inside. Because I knew better. I genuinely knew better. And I went in anyway. It was a Saturday in late October, the kind of evening that arrives in Phoenix with a false promise. A little cooler than you expected, the sky going that bruised violet color just after sundown. The kind of night that feels cinematic in a way that makes you think nothing bad can happen in it. I'd been running deliveries on the side for about 3 months at that point. I worked a full shift at a distribution center during the week, and on weekends I'd pick up the food delivery app and grind through as many runs as I could squeeze into 5 or 6 hours. The math was always the same. Time in the car divided by money earned, minus gas. Most nights I came out ahead. Not by much, but ahead. My name is Jake, and I want to be up front with you. I drove fast, not recklessly weaving through traffic fast, but comfortably over the limit fast. The kind of driving that becomes invisible to you after enough repetitions, where you stop noticing the speedometer because the road is wide and straight and empty, and nothing ever happens. My older brother used to say I drove like someone who had never personally experienced consequences. He wasn't entirely wrong. By 9:30 that night, I'd already completed 4 deliveries. Pizza to a quiet retirement neighborhood, a deli order to a college student who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in several days, a large Thai spread for what sounded like a small house party, a single order of fries and a fountain drink that made me question, not for the first time, whether the delivery fee was worth it for the restaurant or for me. But then my phone pinged with something more substantial. A full combo order from a burger spot near Central Avenue. 2 double patty burgers, a large order of onion rings, waffle fries, and multiple sodas. The ticket price told me the tip could be real money. I accepted it immediately. I picked up the food. Everything was packed well. I loaded it into my insulated bag, settled into the driver's seat, and checked the destination. It was on the other side of town, one of those residential areas full of cul-de-sacs where the streets twist back on themselves and the GPS occasionally gives up. About 14 minutes out. The drive started normally. I was making decent time, had the music on low, and was already mentally calculating what I'd make if I could squeeze in 2 more orders before midnight. The road ahead of me was one of those long, quiet Phoenix boulevards that empties out after 8 p.m. 4 lanes, no cross traffic, a slight downhill grade that seems designed by the city to encourage speed. I was probably doing close to 50 in a 35 zone and genuinely not thinking about it. The red and blue lights in my rearview mirror came without any warning at all. I pulled to the right and sat there with my hands on the wheel while a patrol officer took his time getting out of the cruiser, walked the length of my car, and asked me the 3 questions that are always the same. License, registration. Do you know what speed you were doing? I gave him the honest answer. I didn't exactly know. He took my documents, went back to his car, and I sat there in that specific flavor of helpless quiet that only exists when a police officer is running your information and there's absolutely nothing you can do but wait. He came back holding a citation. When I saw the amount, I actually felt my vision go slightly gray at the edges. It was more than I'd made all night. It might have been more than I was going to make in total before the evening was over. I took it, thanked him out of some reflex I can't explain, and watched him walk back to his cruiser. I sat there for a long moment doing nothing, feeling genuinely, specifically awful. Then I looked at the insulated bag on my passenger seat and remembered that someone was waiting. I pulled back into traffic at a speed I'd never previously been that careful about maintaining. 2 blocks. 3 blocks. The GPS told me to turn right, then right again, and I pulled into the cul-de-sac. I want to try to describe it accurately so you understand what I felt when I got there. 3 houses. That was the whole street. 3 houses on a dead-end loop, and not one of them was projecting any kind of warmth or life. No porch lights, no flicker of television through windows, no cars in driveways with engine heat still rising off them. The only light on the entire street was a single orange street lamp at the entrance, and it was far enough away that its light reached the cul-de-sac, the way a phone flashlight reaches the far end of a large room. Technically present, practically useless. The houses themselves were the kind that accumulate in neighborhoods that got built in a hurry 25 years ago and haven't been fully loved since. Beige, faded, sitting close to each other without quite touching. Like strangers on a bench. I parked in front of the right address, grabbed the food bag, and walked up to the front door. No ring, no camera, no doorbell, just a door with a knocker that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I knocked. 3 firm knocks. Waited. The door opened after about 30 seconds, and the man standing in it was not what I expected. Not that I'd had strong expectations, but there's a certain image you develop in your head during a delivery, based on the address and the order and the time of night, and this man didn't match any version of it. He was average height but thick through the chest and shoulders, bald, with a beard that had the patchy, uneven quality of hair grown more out of inertia than intent, gray and brown mixed together, with a darker stain through the center that I took, at the time, for old food. He was wearing a pair of cargo shorts despite the October chill and a gray sweatshirt with a logo I couldn't make out in the dark. But the thing that stopped me cold was his energy. Some people rat drunk before they open their mouths. It's in the micro expressions, that slight compression of time between thought and response, like the signal is traveling a slightly longer distance than usual. He had that. Plus the smell. A thick, sour, sweet wave of it when he pulled the door open wide. He said, "How you doing, buddy?" in the loud, deliberate way of someone who is compensating. He told me to come in. I held up the bag, said I just needed to hand it off and I'd be out of his hair. He said no. Said it like a second time was the natural thing, like I hadn't understood. Told me he couldn't tip through the app and had cash he wanted to give me. Said to come in, it would take a second. And here is where I need to stop and be honest with you. Because I've thought about this particular 30 seconds probably 1,000 times since it happened. Every part of my instinct said no. The dark street, the empty houses, the smell, the too loud voice, the way he was insistent in a direction I hadn't invited. My gut was sending a very clear message, and the message was, hand him the bag, wait for him to grab it, and leave. But the ticket was still sitting on my passenger seat, and I was already losing money on the night. And there was something about the specific social mechanics of the situation. This man, in his doorway, looking at me with that slightly wounded expression, like my hesitation was an insult, that activated some reflex I wish I didn't have. The reflex that says, don't be rude. Don't make this weird. Just go. I stepped inside. The house was a disaster. Not dirty the way a bachelor pad gets dirty, disorganized and cluttered, but functional. Dirty the way a place gets when someone has stopped caring about it entirely. Old mail on the floor, a couch with something stacked on every cushion. That smell, cigarettes and old food and something underneath it I still couldn't name, wrapping around everything. He walked me through to the kitchen without turning on any extra lights, and the kitchen was worse. Dishes piled past the edges of the sink, fast food bags balled up on the counter, a bare bulb overhead swinging slightly when he walked past it. He told me to set the food on the table. Then he opened a door at the back of the kitchen, basement stairs, and told me he'd be right back. Cash was down there. He'd just be a second. The door swung shut. His footsteps went down, heavy and uneven on the wooden steps. I stood in that kitchen holding my phone, and I texted my friend exactly the words. "Bro, you won't believe this delivery. In some guy's house. This is a horror movie, LOL. I sent it as a joke. I was covering the nerves with humor the way I always do. Then came the sound. Imagine a 6-foot metal shelving unit toppling over. Not slowly, all at once. The way something goes when the base kicks out and gravity takes it sideways at full speed. That's the sound that hit me from below. A massive, catastrophic crash, followed by a secondary cascade of smaller impacts. Bottles, jars, tools, something glass. And then underneath all of that, a scream. A sustained, high human scream of pain. I was at the basement door before I'd made a conscious decision to move. I pulled it open. Darkness below, total, complete darkness. Not a single light on anywhere down there. I called down. I heard groaning, low and real and miserable. I asked where the light switch was. He didn't answer that question. He just said the word, help, over and over, with the ragged breath of someone who is genuinely trying to push sound out through pain. I turned on my phone flashlight and started down. The stairs were old and narrow, built for an era when basements were utility spaces and no one worried too much about comfort. They creaked under my weight in a way that felt almost theatrical, every step announcing itself, every board bending slightly under the pressure. I held my phone out in front of me, casting a thin white cone into the dark below. The beam caught the edge of a shelf unit, a scattering of items across the concrete floor, the glint of a broken bottle. I was halfway down when the groaning stopped, not tapered off, not faded. Stopped, like a volume switch going to zero in one instant. The silence that replaced it was the kind that has its own physical presence. You feel it on your skin, in your ears, in the back of your throat. I stopped on the step. I said, much quieter this time, "Sir, are you still with me?" Nothing. And then, from somewhere directly below the bottom of the staircase, from the darkness at the base of the steps, I heard it. A single dry crunch. A tiny sound, the kind a small stone makes when someone shifts their weight and grinds it against a concrete floor. Someone was standing there, at the bottom of the stairs, in the complete dark, still. They hadn't fallen. They hadn't been hurt. They had lured me down here, into a basement I couldn't see, and now they were standing right below the last step, waiting. I turned and ran, up the stairs, taking them two at a time, one hand on the railing, one hand gripping my phone. Through the kitchen, phone light swinging wildly, down the hallway, out the front door. There was a police officer standing on the porch. He was holding 2 pieces of paper, folded and clipped together, and he asked, with mild professional curiosity, if they were mine, my registration. It had slipped from the window when he'd handed it back to me on the street. He'd driven to the address to return it. I was breathing hard. I grabbed the papers and immediately told him something was very wrong inside this house. He asked me to explain. I did, fast, stumbling over the sequence but getting the shape of it across. The man, the basement, the crash, the silence, the footsteps in the dark. The officer's expression changed. He asked to see the basement, I walked him inside. He took one look at the door, put his hand on his holster, and called down into the darkness himself. When there was no response, he turned on his department flashlight, far more powerful than my phone, and told me to stay at the top of the stairs. He went down slowly, step by step, until I couldn't see him anymore. I waited. 30 seconds, a minute, and then the sound of a confrontation, a crash, raised voices, something hitting the wall, a struggle in the dark, and then a single gunshot, clean and final, and crying that followed it. Real crying. The kind that bypasses performance entirely and comes straight out of somewhere biological and involuntary. The officer called up to me. He needed help getting the man to the surface. I went down far enough to grip an arm. The man was conscious, shot in the lower leg, and incandescent with fury, screaming at both of us, incoherent and relentless. Between the two of us, we got him up the stairs and out the front door, where the officer called for an ambulance and backup, while I stood in the cold night air, trying to steady my breathing. I gave a witness statement on the porch, 45 minutes from when I'd arrived. When they finally let me leave, I sat in my car for a long time before I could make myself drive. Here is what I believe. The speeding ticket slowed me down. It cost me 8 minutes on the side of the road. Those 8 minutes put the officer in the same neighborhood, close enough to notice my registration slip from his window, close enough to think to return it. If I hadn't been speeding, he wouldn't have been there. If he hadn't been there, I would have run out the front door into an empty street. And when that man came up the stairs after me, because he would have, I would have been alone. I drive the speed limit now, every time. Without exception, it is the cheapest insurance I have ever purchased. Into the dark woods. There's a type of deception that works by stacking normalcy on top of normalcy until the abnormal thing at the center of it goes unnoticed. Each individual piece of it, taken alone, seems reasonable. It's only when you get to the middle and look back that you realize every step was designed to get you exactly there. I know this now. I learned it in a nature preserve in suburban Georgia at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, standing in the dark with someone's hands around my ankles. My name is Marcus. At the time of this story, I was 26 years old, living in a suburb about 40 minutes outside of Savannah, and picking up evening delivery work to supplement my income. I used my motorcycle for deliveries, a mid-sized bike that got me through traffic faster than a car, especially in residential areas where GPS routing sometimes treats every neighborhood like a highway interchange. I'd been doing it long enough to have a feel for the work, long enough to have a category in my head for unusual but fine that was probably a little too capacious. The order came in on a Tuesday evening in early June. Mexican food from a place near the highway, burrito bowl with extra guacamole, a pair of tacos, a large horchata. The destination was a residential address roughly 12 minutes east, in one of those neighborhoods of modest two-story houses with long driveways and big trees that make everything look slightly more rural than it is. I made the pickup without incident, packed the food into my saddlebag, and rode east. The house at the listed address was easy to find. Brick facade, dark red shutters, a long driveway flanked by boxwoods that had grown past anyone's interest in trimming them. I rode up the driveway, pulled the food from my bag, walked to the front door, and rang the bell. The woman who opened it was probably in her mid-60s, wearing reading glasses and a cardigan, with the expression of someone who has been interrupted in the middle of something quiet. I asked if I had the right address for a delivery for someone named Ron. She told me very gently that no one by that name had ever lived here, and that she'd owned the house for over 2 decades. I apologized, walked back to the bike, and checked the app. The address was correct. Every digit of it matched what I'd been sent. I checked twice. I called the customer number. One ring, then voicemail. I sent a text instead. The response came back almost immediately, within about 5 seconds, faster than most people respond to anything. And it was friendly, apologetic, explaining that he hadn't put his actual residence on the order, that he was hanging out with a friend in the nature preserve across the street, and that he'd really appreciate it if I could bring the food to him by the fire. He ended the message by mentioning a generous tip. I looked up from my phone and across the street. There was a small iron gate with a nature preserve sign. Beside it, a gap in the fence just wide enough for a person to walk through. A dirt trail disappearing into a wall of trees. Let me tell you about my thought process here, because I've gone over it many times since. I had, a few months earlier, delivered food to a park. The customer had given a park address as the drop-off because their apartment building's entrance was confusing, and the park bench near the main path was easier to find. It had been completely uneventful, a 30-second handoff, a good tip, no weirdness. That experience was sitting in my head like a reference point, normalizing what I was looking at across the street. A nature preserve at night is not the same as a park in the afternoon. I knew that in the abstract. I did not apply it concretely enough. I told myself it would take 3 minutes. I walked through the fence gap and started down the trail. For the first several hundred yards, it was manageable. There were wooden light posts every 30 feet or so along the path, each one casting a modest circle of amber light. And with the bike still visible behind me and the street still audible, it felt like the kind of thing that was maybe a little inconvenient but not particularly threatening. Then the trail reached the last post and the light ended, and the path continued forward into the kind of darkness that has actual texture to it. I stood at the edge of it for a moment. That's the moment I think about. That exact pause. Because what I did at that pause was look to my left and see the faint orange glow of a fire coming from somewhere deep in the trees, and decide that what I was looking at was confirmation rather than warning. There's a fire. That means someone is there. That means this is fine. I left the path and moved through the brush toward the light. The ground between the trees was uneven, soft in places, with roots that caught my feet in the dark. Branches at face level that I had to push through. The smell of wood smoke getting stronger as I went. I focused on the glow and kept moving, and eventually the trees thinned just enough that I could see the fire itself clearly. A small but well-built ring of stones, orange and yellow flames eating through a careful stack of logs, burning steadily. And absolutely no one around it. I stopped at the edge of the firelight and looked in every direction. No chairs, no blankets, no cooler, no food wrappers, no cups, no evidence that anyone had been sitting here. The clearing around the fire had a strange quality of intentionality. The fire was too well built, the wood stacked too deliberately for it to have been abandoned. But there was no one. I called out his name. Nothing. I called again, louder. The sound disappeared into the trees. That was when I noticed the tent. It was set up maybe 10 feet behind the fire ring, dark green nylon half hidden by a low pine branch. Average camping tent, the kind that accommodates one person on a sleeping pad. Zipped shut. I approached it carefully, crouched down, and said his name at the canvas. Still nothing. I unzipped the tent. Someone was inside, lying face down, feet closest to the opening, wearing dark jeans and hiking boots. Still. I waited for them to react to the sound of the zipper, to the light from my phone hitting the inside of the tent. They didn't move at all. I stood up. I decided in that moment that I was completely done with this. I marked the order delivered on the app, turned away from the tent, and took one step toward the trees. "Are you alone?" The voice came from somewhere ahead of me, from the dark between two large pines at the edge of the firelight. A man was standing there, standing still, not moving toward me, not moving away, just standing in the shadows, watching. He was far enough back that the fire didn't reach him properly, and I could only make out a general shape and the position of his head. "No," I said. The answer came out of me before I had time to think about whether it was wise or how I'd back it up. "My partner's on the trail. Why aren't they here with you?" "They stay with the bike." A pause. He seemed to consider this. Then he said, in a tone of almost total normalcy, "Where's my food?" There is a particular feeling that happens when you suddenly understand the full geometry of a situation you've been inside for several minutes without seeing it clearly. It's not like panic exactly. It's more like a sudden cold clarity, like the temperature inside your chest dropping several degrees all at once. Because I understood it then. All of it. The fake address, the redirect, the text that came back in 5 seconds flat, the fire that had no one around it, the person in the tent who hadn't reacted to anything, the man in the dark standing between me and the trees. This was constructed. All of it. Someone had planned this. I threw the food bag at the fire ring, not at the man, just toward the fire, because I needed something to happen in the next half second that wasn't me standing still. And I ran. I made it one step before two hands grabbed both of my ankles from behind and pulled. The person in the tent had not been sleeping. They had been waiting on their stomach with their arms at their sides and their feet toward the opening. And when I turned to run, they spun and reached out and caught both feet simultaneously in a grip that was practiced and deliberate. I went down hard onto my hands, felt the impact up through my wrists, and kicked backward as hard as I could while pulling both legs forward. The grip broke. I scrambled upright and ran through the brush toward where I knew the trail was, crashing through branches, stumbling over roots, getting a low-hanging limb across the side of my face hard enough to leave a welt I'd still have 3 days later. I could hear movement behind me. Definitely one person, possibly two. But I didn't turn to look. I hit the trail. The lampposts were ahead of me and I ran toward them, following the light. And when I burst through the fence gap and got to my motorcycle, my hands were shaking badly enough that I dropped the key. I picked it up. I got the engine running. I didn't look back once. I rode until I hit a commercial stretch, bright lights, chain restaurants, other cars moving, and then I pulled into a parking lot and sat there with the engine idling. I sat there for probably 10 minutes. My hands were still trembling. The welt on the side of my face was starting to sting. I contacted the delivery app support line when I got home and explained what had happened. Their response came back eventually in the kind of corporate language that makes clear no specific human being has read your situation. A generic note about escalating safety concerns to local law enforcement. I didn't file a police report. I've thought about that decision since, and I can't give you a great reason for it. I was unhurt. I was exhausted. I wanted the night to be over. None of those are good reasons, but they're the honest ones. Here is what I want you to take from this because I think it might matter to someone. The setup was good. It was designed to move you forward one reasonable step at a time. First, the plausible address mistake. Then the immediate friendly text response. Then the park delivery parallel that I was already holding in my memory. Then the fire, the visible confirmation that someone was there. Each piece of it was calibrated to get you to the next piece, all the way to the edge of the firelight and into the dark beyond it. The moment where it could all have stopped was at the fence. When the light posts ended and the darkness started, I had everything I needed to make a different decision. My gut was already running the calculation. It knew, and I overrode it because I was holding a parallel experience in my memory, a much safer experience, and applying it to a situation that didn't match. Your instincts are smarter than your rationalizations, every single time. Turn around, leave the food, lose the tip, walk back to the light. It will never have been worth it. He was already watching. Before I tell you what I saw when I lifted that curtain, I want you to understand how ordinary the night started. Because that's what I think about most. Not the fear, not the police, not the man on the porch with his smile. I think about how completely normal the first 45 minutes were. How that normalcy was working against me the whole time. The way still water looks shallow until your foot hits the bottom and it isn't. My name is Lily, and this happened about 3 years ago in Portland, Oregon, in the house I was renting with my roommate at the time. My roommate, Claire, was away for the week, visiting family in Seattle, which meant I had the place to myself. The house was a good one, an older craftsman on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood where the biggest complaint was usually parking, not safety. Covered porch, heavy front door with a solid deadbolt. Neighbors I recognized by face, if not by name. The kind of place where you stop thinking about whether your doors are locked. I'd gotten home late from work that Tuesday, one of those long shifts where you're too tired to think clearly and too wired to sit still. Cooking was not going to happen. I opened a delivery app, ordered Chinese food from a place I'd used before and trusted, and settled onto the couch with the TV on and my phone in my hand to wait. 30 minutes was the estimate, then 35, then 45. I watched the little map icon representing my driver take what I can only describe as a creative approach to the most direct route between the restaurant and my address. By the time I called him, I was less hungry than I was just tired of watching the icon wander. He picked up after 3 rings. I said, "Hey, I have an order on the way. Just checking how far out you are." He said, "Who is this?" That's the moment. Right there. You tell me, in all the times you've received a customer service call or a delivery check-in, how many times has the person on the other end responded to your question? With "Who is this?" Not "Where are you?" Not "Just a second." Not "I'm 2 minutes away." "Who is this?" I told him I was the customer he had an order for. He paused, then said, "Oh, right." Said he was close. He hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a few seconds afterward, turning the exchange over in my head, trying to find the version of it that was ordinary. Maybe he had multiple orders going. Maybe he'd spaced out and forgotten which run he was on. Maybe. About 8 minutes later, my phone rang again. Different number. I noticed that immediately. It wasn't the same number he'd called from the first time. I answered anyway. Silence. I said hello twice, then a third time. Then, "Hello? Is someone there? I'm outside." Male voice. Flat. Without the apologetic undertone you'd expect from a delivery driver announcing his arrival. Without any of the social lubrication that normally accompanies that kind of call. Just, "I'm outside." I said okay and described the house, the porch light, the stone steps, the mailbox with the number on it. He didn't respond to any of it. I asked if he could see the house. "I see you," he said. I was standing in my living room. The curtains were drawn. He couldn't have seen me through the curtains. But the way he said it, that particular combination of certainty and calm, made my whole body go wrong at once. A full system alert that bypassed rational thought entirely. I asked him where he was parked. "You look really pretty tonight," he said. I hung up and locked my phone. I opened the delivery app. The screen said, "Order delivered 2 minutes ago." I had received no food, no knock, no ring of the doorbell. I stood in my living room with the locked phone in my hand and tried to think through what was happening. Someone had my name. Someone had my address. Someone had told the app the food had been delivered, which meant they had the driver's account open, which meant they either were the driver or had the driver's phone. And someone was outside, or claimed to be outside, and could describe me, or was saying they could describe me, which was almost worse because it meant either of two things. They had been watching for long enough to see me before I'd started closing curtains, or they were trying to make me feel like they had. Both options required the same response. I turned off every light in the house. I started in the living room. I moved to the side of the window, not in front of it, to the side, where I could angle my view through the narrow gap between the curtain panel and the frame without being visible from outside. The front yard was empty. The street was quiet. 2 cars parked at the curb, neither of them occupied as far as I could tell. I moved to the dining room, shifted the curtain the smallest possible amount. The side yard, empty. Kitchen window above the sink. The neighbor's fence, nothing moving. I worked my way to the back of the house. The den was a room I used infrequently, a secondary space where we kept an old couch, a small TV we almost never watched, and various things that hadn't found a permanent home elsewhere. The curtains back there were heavy panels that I'd drawn closed months ago and hadn't touched since. I reached for the pull cord, and I still don't completely understand this instinct, but I am grateful for it every time I think about it. Something made me stop before I raised them fully. Instead, I crouched down. I reached for the bottom edge of the curtain panel and lifted it the smallest amount I could. Maybe 3 inches of clearance, low to the ground, just enough to see the bottom section of the back patio through the glass. A man was sitting in the patio chair by the back door. He was facing the house. His hands were on his knees. He wasn't on a phone, wasn't looking at anything in particular, wasn't moving. He was just sitting there in the dark in complete, patient stillness, the way someone sits when they are waiting, and they are, not in a hurry. I let the curtain fall and pressed my back against the wall and stood very still. My phone lit up. Same number. I answered without a word. He spoke before I did. He said, "I just saw the curtain move." I said, "I'm calling the police." I hung up and dialed 911. I kept my voice as level as I could manage. I told the dispatcher there was an unknown man sitting in my backyard, that I believed he was associated with a food delivery I'd ordered but hadn't received, that he'd been calling me from outside my home. The dispatcher told me to stay away from exterior doors and windows, that officers were on the way. My phone rang again. I declined. It rang again. I declined. And again and again. Not frantic, not escalating in frequency, just steady. Patient. 7 times in 3 minutes. The steadiness was worse than urgency would have been. Urgency would have told me he was afraid of something. The steadiness told me he wasn't. I moved to the hallway. Interior wall. No windows. And sat down on the floor with my back against the wall and my knees pulled to my chest, watching my screen light up over and over in the dark. A knock at the front door. "Police!" I got up and walked to the door. I reached for the deadbolt. Then I stopped and looked through the peephole. The man standing on my porch was not wearing a uniform. He was in street clothes, a gray jacket, dark jeans, work boots. And when his eyes found the peephole, he smiled. It was a specific smile, not threatening in the way that bared teeth are threatening, but in the way that said, "I know what I'm doing. I've done this before. I know you're right on the other side of this door." He pushed open the outer storm door and tried the handle. I threw my full weight against the interior door with both hands and got the deadbolt locked. He didn't pound on the door. He didn't shout. He tried the handle once more, not hard, just firmly. And then there was silence, and then footsteps going off the porch and away. I stood against the door and didn't breathe. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, I know because I was watching the clock on my phone, there was another knock, and this time, the voice was different. Calm and measured with that particular professional steadiness that doesn't sound like calm because it's the absence of stress. It sounds like calm because the person has been trained to produce it under pressure. I checked the peephole, uniform, badge, blue and red lights visible at the curb behind them. I opened the door. 2 officers. They did a full perimeter check, front yard, side yards, backyard. One of them came back holding a cell phone in a gloved hand. Found it on the patio table. The lock screen background was a photo. A white man in his early 30s, smiling, arm around a blonde woman somewhere outdoors. Sunny. Normal. The phone's recent calls showed my number. We worked backward from there. The driver's description, taken from the delivery app, matched the man in the photo. Not the man who had been on my porch, not the man who had been in my backyard. The man in the photo was almost certainly the legitimate driver who had been dispatched with my order. The man outside my house was someone else entirely. Someone who had encountered the driver mid-delivery, taken his phone, gotten my name and address and order information from the active delivery, and then continued to my home on his own. He had everything he needed before he ever arrived. My name, my address, the legitimate cover story of a food delivery. He'd already been standing outside for long enough to describe me before I'd started checking windows. The officers left after an hour and a half, report filed, phone bagged as evidence. I triple-checked every lock in the house. I called Claire and gave her the short version. I slept with a chair against the bedroom door and a lamp on. As far as I know, he never came back. As far as I know, the police never identified him. The phone was a lead, but I don't know what came of it. Here is what I think about when I think about this night. He didn't need to break in. He had a legitimate reason to be at my door. He had my name. He had my food. If I had opened that door without looking, if the deadbolt had been less solid, if my instinct when I heard the word police had been relief instead of caution, it would have been a different story. The peephole saved me. The decision to crouch before lifting the curtain saved me. The choice to hang up and call 911 instead of staying on the line and reasoning with him saved me. I don't order delivery to my home anymore without watching the driver's location icon in real time, all the way from the restaurant to my street. I don't open a door for someone who claims to be police without confirming through the peephole that they're in uniform. And I never ever assume that because someone has a legitimate reason to be at your door, they are who they say they are. Trust is earned at the door, every time.